Hello! Let's get started on our next lecture, Dinosaur Extinction. This is still under the evolution category of our Bio 24 class, wherein we'll talk a little bit about the changes that occurred during the time of the dinosaurs. Before we talk about how the dinosaurs went extinct, let's talk about how they arose. Dinosaurs first appeared on Earth 250 million years ago. This was during the Permian-Triassic extinction event, which wiped out 95% of all life on Earth. Some scientists refer to this period as the Great Dying. This is a result of volcanic activity across 4 continents. These aren't just simple volcanoes that we have today, but in fact supervolcanoes, much larger and more long-lasting than the ones that we have erupting today. These volcanoes existed along what's known as the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP for short. And all told, they released enough lava and magma to blanket the entire United States. And as you can imagine, this made dramatic changes on Earth. It released an excessive amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, caused extremely acidic precipitation, rain, snow, hail, fog. This acidic precipitation is estimated to have been around the pH of 2, which is equivalent to lemon juice. And this ended up falling all over the Earth, changing not just life on land, but also life in the oceans. The Permian-Triassic extinction event eventually led way into what's referred to as the Mesozoic era. There have been 4 time periods on Earth: the Precambrian, which was a vast majority of life on Earth; the Paleozoic, during which time most life on Earth lived in the ocean; the Mesozoic, and that's the time of the dinosaurs we'll be talking about now; and finally the Cenozoic, which is the current time period we find ourselves in now. The Mesozoic, so-called middle time period, is the time of the dinosaurs and contains 3 periods. The Mesozoic era is divided into the Triassic period, the Jurassic period, and the Cretaceous period. The Triassic period existed from 250 million years ago to 200 million years ago, lasting roughly 50 million years. The Jurassic period existed from 200 million years ago to 145 million years ago, again, roughly 50 million years. And then the Cretaceous period lasted from 145 million years ago to 65 million years ago. This was about 80 million years, or a little longer than the first 2. Remains of dinosaurs have been found on every continent on the planet, including Antarctica, indicating that during these 3 time periods, dinosaurs really did literally roam the Earth. Let's talk about each one of these periods and what happened with the dinosaurs during these times. The first is the Triassic. The Triassic period occurred when there were no polar ice caps on Earth. The Earth was so warm that there was no permanent ice at the poles. The climate was very hot and dry, and most of the land that existed at the time existed as deserts, with simply, as we have today in our deserts, seasonal monsoons, which would drop large amounts of precipitation over short periods of time. At the beginning of the Triassic, there were no dinosaurs at all, but there were 3 types of reptiles that existed on land. These 3 different types of reptiles are generally categorized as the pelycosaurs, which are primitive reptiles; therapsids, which are a reptile that eventually evolved into mammals; and archosaurs, which evolved into dinosaurs. This indicates that the mammals did not come from dinosaurs, that the mammals evolved separately from reptiles, and the dinosaurs evolved separately from reptiles. And there, of course, are reptiles that existed then and still exist today. The first mammals then evolved in the late Triassic period. So while we refer to today's modern time, the Cenozoic era, as the time or age of the mammals, mammals did exist during the time of the dinosaurs. The mammals that existed during the time of the dinosaurs were relatively small, lived underground, and only came out at night. They evolved this lifestyle partially to protect themselves from predators, and as a result, they needed to stay warm during their nocturnal forays, as well as while they lived underground. In an effort to do this, they evolved fur and the ability to regulate their body temperature so that they could stay warm during these times. The mammals that existed during the time of the dinosaurs were roughly the size and body type of shrews, or little mice. Oceans were, of course, teeming with life at this time, and the only flying animals on Earth at the beginning of the Triassic were insects. The plants that existed during the Triassic were, generally speaking, only cycads, ferns, and ginkgos. Cycads look a little bit like palm trees, but in fact, they are extremely different. Palm trees are very recently evolved, whereas cycads evolved millions and millions of years ago. These tend to grow very slowly and don't produce coconuts or anything like that. Ferns, I'm sure you're familiar with, also existed during the time of the dinosaurs. And then we had the ginkgo. Now the ginkgo tree, it still exists today, and especially around the West Valley College campus, we can see ginkgos planted in a lot of people's yards and just along roadways. They're really quite pretty. You may have heard of ginkgo biloba, which is a type of ginkgo that forms leaves with two lobes. There are other types of ginkgos as well. Ginkgos exist actually as male and female species, so they're dioecious. So you can plant either a female ginkgo tree or a male ginkgo tree, which is also a little unusual. The dinosaurs that did evolve during the Triassic period were relatively small. And the reason why they were relatively small is because there was generally a lack of food supply. The deserts that most of the landmass were did not provide for a lot of moisture for growing plants. And as a result, not a lot of food meant smaller dinosaurs. The reason why most of the landmass existed as a desert is because at the beginning of the Triassic period, we had most of the land consolidated into a single formation known as Pangaea. Pangaea was when all of the continents were consolidated together into one giant landmass. This is not the first time this has happened. In fact, the continents and continental plates on Earth continue to move together and move apart, moving together and apart over and over again. The most recent time that all the continents were together was 225 million years ago. And we give that landmass a name, Pangaea. But this has happened many times before. Since that time period, the land masses started to break apart, so that by the end of the Triassic, Pangaea had actually separated into two major land masses, Laurasia and Gondwanaland. Just like we have today, when there is a giant landmass or a big continent, many of the inside or interior parts of the continent tend to be shielded from a lot of the precipitation drawn out from the oceans. And as a result, we get a lot of desert formation. So you can imagine on a giant landmass like Pangaea, where much of the land is actually separated from the ocean and far from the ocean, there was not a lot of precipitation there. However, by the time Pangaea began breaking apart and the oceans were able to inundate and get into closer parts of the continents, we had an increased amount of precipitation. That takes us to the Jurassic period. The continents continued to separate throughout the Jurassic and the Cretaceous until eventually they became what they are today. But during the Jurassic, because the continents were separating and the planet still remained very warm, the land ended up being very warm and humid instead of hot and dry. Warm and humid led the interior portions of the continents to be more like a rainforest with lots of plant life. Because we had so much plant life on the land at the time, the dinosaurs had an added food supply, and they were able to increase in size. The Jurassic time period was in fact characterized by having the largest dinosaurs. This, I think, is part of the reason why we have movies like Jurassic Park instead of Cretaceous Park or Triassic Park, is because this is when the dinosaurs got their very biggest. Mammals still existed at this time, but remember they remained small, nocturnal, and mostly underground. What's interesting, and you can see this in this picture here at the bottom, is that there were some dinosaurs that started to evolve feathers during the Jurassic period. These were feathered dinosaurs, not really quite birds yet, but we start to see the evolution of birds during this process. These feathered dinosaurs include Archaeopteryx, one of the first fossilized remains of feathered dinosaurs known to man. The oceans were still crowded with life, but dinosaurs, in addition to existing in the ocean and on land, began also taking to the skies. These were not feathered dinosaurs, but in fact, flying, unfeathered dinosaurs. This is like your pterodactyl. Pterodactyls don't have feathers, but they're able to fly. It's an interesting note to make that many of these feathered dinosaurs, when they first evolved, were not in fact able to fly, but in fact just used the feathers either to attract mates or to help them hop and glide from tree to tree, much like a flying squirrel. Flying squirrels can't fly, but they can glide a little bit. It wasn't until much later that these feathered dinosaurs eventually evolved flight. So dinosaurs, in fact, flew before the feathered dinosaurs did. In our next lecture, we'll get into the Cretaceous and then talk about what happened that ended the Cretaceous, leading to the extinction of the dinosaurs.